So for this chapter, I went through in quite detail all different bits of neuroscience research that focus on creativity. And it's actually a really exciting time to be studying what goes on in the brain during creativity. Because for a long time, people have been interested in this, but there's been no real way to get at it in the lab. Scientists had to rely on very watered down acts of creativity, like solving word puzzles or anagrams and stuff. It's not really what we think of as creativity in the real world. But that is actually starting to change now, and there's been a crop of recent studies looking at all sorts of things. I mean, freestyle rappers, improvising, pianists, even poets and artists at work. And with the latest technology, you can actually see what is playing out inside their skulls in real time. And some of this is just, gobsmackingly interesting, but I think there are also some useful nuggets of insight that we can draw from this. And so we tried to wrap some of these up in this chapter, and we boiled it down really to 10 creative mind or creative brain elements. And I'll give you a kind of overview of how they fit in. And in order to do that, I think it might be helpful to put them into a kind of broader context in thinking about how the brain works. And a useful way to think about the brain was drawn up by the Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman, who wrote about in his excellent book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And he looked across all the kind of brain research, the psychology research, and summarized with a very broad brush how the brain works into two main systems. Well, as I said, system 2 is the conscious, self-aware bit. It's the bit that sets down at the desk and chooses your creative task and thinks up a strategy of how to approach it. I mean, it's often very logical. You think strategically and analytically, and so the second element there is the analytical mind, which is the problem-solving mind, really, how we manipulate different bits of information and recombine them and put them together and try and come up with something new and exciting. And another aspect of systems 2, which forms one of our elements, is the prolific mind. And this is the idea that if you want to have good ideas, it can be quite a big ask, a quite intimidating prospect. But several studies from psychology and neuroscience have shown that if you want to get to a good idea, you can start by having lots of ideas. And if you work through and keep going, push on beyond where you think you've got the easy answers, some of what comes next is really insightful. So that's the prolific mind. And as I've said, it feels intuitively like system 2 rules the show, but actually when it comes to creativity, we all know that that isn't the whole story. I mean, we all talk about sleeping on a problem, or we all know that the feeling that when you're least expecting it, when you're rushing to a bus or in a shower, to take a bit of a cliche, a really great idea can just pop into your head. So what's going on there? You weren't even thinking about your problem, but something has happened. And that is the work of system 1, which is largely unconscious. You're not aware of what's going on, but it's huge and it's powerful and it works very fast and very intuitively. And this, you can also think of it as the working of the unconscious mind, which is one of the big elements in this chapter. And 100 years ago, in fact, before modern neuroscience, Sigmund Freud came up with a really nice way to think about the unconscious mind. And it also fits with Daniel Kahneman's more recent synthesis. And he said you can think of the mind as an iceberg. And the glittering tip of the iceberg is what we see, and that's our conscious experience. That's system 2 in this scheme. But there's much, much more of the iceberg deep down below in the depths, completely invisible. And that, in Freud's view, is the unconscious mind. And it's powerful and it's big and it has a huge role to play in creativity. And one of the key things it does is, in the creative process, is it provides options for your mind to wander. And the wandering mind is one of our elements in the book. So mind wandering has a bit of a bad rep in our society. We think of it as being distracted. We maybe think about dwelling on past misfortunes. But actually, when it comes to creativity, the wandering mind can be really powerful. So what's going on when your mind's wandering? A lot of it is exercising your associative memory, and the associating mind is another one of our elements. And this describes this amazing power your brain has to make links and connections in really unexpected ways. So, I mean, if I throw a word or a concept at you, anything, it could be blue cheese, for example, immediately, within a millisecond, there's like a cloud of associations going off. Maybe you think yuck, maybe you think delicious, you think of the color blue, the texture. It might even create an emotional response. You might salivate, or you might feel a bit sick if you don't like blue cheese. And this is an incredible thing. We don't even think about it. We don't notice most of this. But there's this cloud of associations. And if we can tap into that, we can find some really unexpected and even creative associations. And we do this intuitively, but there are also ways to tap into this process. For example, if you just frame a challenge from an unexpected angle, you can feed the associative memory something unexpected, and then unexpected things come in turn. For example, I mean, there was a psychology paper where the researchers asked their subjects to simply list as many different forms of transport as they could think of, which they duly did. And then another group of students were asked exactly the same question, think of forms of transport, but this time they were told that the question came from some university researchers in Greece. And this very subtle twist in framing changed how people approached the problem, changed how their associative memory worked, and they came up with much more original forms of transport. So it can be very powerful. And when it comes to creating with your unconscious, with this kind of incubating power, it also turns out from the lab studies that it really matters how you feel, what your state is. And in particular, if you're feeling relaxed, it seems to really open up your attention. You're much more willing to entertain speculative ideas and hunches. And that can be really powerful. And emotion is also important. And it turns out if you're in a positive, happy frame of mind, you're more likely to wander in a productive way rather than a kind of self-destructive dwelling on the past. But equally, it's not all fun and games in creativity. There can be a real benefit to a more serious, even maybe a kind of sad or negative frame of mind. Because what turns out from the psychology studies is that when you're in a more serious frame of mind, you become more logical, more critical and analytical. You're firing up the system 1 that I talked about again. And at lots of stages, some creative problems, at different stages of a creative problem, that's exactly what you want. So it's this really powerful realization that changing your emotional state, your state of mind, will have a big impact on how you work and how you think creatively. So how to wrap this all up? I'm going to return to some of the studies I mentioned earlier. For example, the freestyling rappers and the poets, that you can now watch them improvising in the brain scanner in real time. So these new studies of rappers and poets improvising in the brain scanner, you're seeing this action unfolding in real time. And what we learn from this is the kind of almost the take home from this chapter, is that there's no sense to even think about a creative brain or a single creative brain process or a creative brain state. The most creative minds are actually quite messy and flexible minds. They switch between different states, between system 1 and system 2, for example. So, for example, take the poets. When they were they were just trying to get their poetry out, freely improvising, if you like, writing, they actually toned down, consciously or unconsciously, the rational thinking parts of their brain. If you like, they put their self-critic on ice, and they just let themselves flow and get the words out there. But the neuroscientists doing the study then did a follow-up, and they looked at what happened when they wanted to revise and edit. They went back over that work to work out how to make it better, which lines worked, which lines didn't. Then you see almost the opposite brain state. So they're souping up all this, the logic, the analysis, to great effect. And so they're seamlessly, if you like, switching between different brain states. And that, I think, is the key, knowing when to put in the hard graft, the effort, the system 2 thinking. And when that hits a wall, when you get to the edge of what you can do with that, it really pays just to kick back, relax. It can feel a bit lazy, if you like, to go off and incubate. But the message from so many of these studies is that it's absolutely crucial. When you disengage a bit from the problem, your unconscious mind doesn't disengage. It keeps worrying away at it in the background. And that's when these kind of pearls of insight can suddenly bubble up, seemingly from nowhere. And often that's what people are waiting for. But in the longer view, very often that's only the beginning. Because once these fragile ideas have hatched out, you've got to take them and help them survive in the big bad world. And hopefully, some of the elements in this chapter and the rest of Claire's book will help you do just that. So thank you.
So thanks very much for watching. I hope that's given you a taster of what the book's about. The book's available to buy now online, and I really hope that you enjoy it.